Hello there, this is James Scrofty, it is 1978, with what is essentially a remake of the video that I made shortly after Trump's election, almost exactly 2 years ago now, back on my old channel. A video which I'm making almost entirely in response to the laughably blinkered article in Starity Underbar asserting that Trump will likely win re-election in 2020. Because although no different from any other reactionary and regressive propagandist, the author of that opinion piece cherry-picks the facts which support his preconceived conclusion while twisting, dismissing and ignoring the rest, in this case basing his entire assertion on the fact that first of all, the incumbent always has an advantage, and that secondly, Clinton and Obama were both wiped out in the midterms before winning re-election, so checkmate liberals. For all intents and purposes from an electoral standpoint, virtually nothing has changed since November of 2016, meaning that just as it was 2 years ago now, the question is still not how did Trump win, but on the contrary, why did Hillary lose? Because leaving aside everything to do with the midterms and the fact that Trump's approval ratings are underwater in the Rust Belt states which, as I'll explain in a moment, swung the election for him by an act win last time around, as well as the fact that most economists already agreed that the US was heading for a recession either next year or in 2020, long before Trump started tanking the stock market through his infantile pissing contest with China, and that to top it all off, essentially everything with Trump's name on it is now under investigation, raising the genuine possibility that the only thing Trump will be running for in 2 years' time is a country with no extradition treaty, even though Hillary received 15 million fewer votes than Obama did back in 2008 and 10 million fewer than he did back in 2012, because 2016 had the lowest turnout in a presidential election for at least 2 decades, meaning that there are potentially millions of voters who stayed home because they didn't want to choose between the lesser of two evils or believe that Hillary had it in the bag, who either will or can be persuaded to vote blue in 2020. She still beat Trump by 2.8 million votes nationwide, while in contrast, Trump only quote-unquote won by fewer than 88,000 votes spread across 3 Rust Belt states, meaning that he only won, in inverted commas, by the skin of his balls, and even then, he only won thanks to the confluence of 4 extraordinary events. First of all, this is part of running the second worst presidential campaign in living memory, but once again somehow managing to win the popular vote by 2.8 million. Hillary didn't even bother to visit any of the 3 states that would ultimately decide the election, falsely assuming that the blue wall would never crack. Secondly, but her emails, but her God-forsaken emails, with the mainstream media falling into exactly the same trap that it always does of defining balance solely in terms of airtime, thus feeling compelled to run a negative story about Hillary every time that they ran one regarding Trump, with the key distinction being that while Trump was mired in scandal from day one and the story was always changing, meaning that just has been the case for the last 2 years, it's impossible to stay outraged about any one thing that Trump does for very long, or even remember what he did more than a couple of days ago, because part of his survival strategy is to distract from every bad thing he ever does by doing something even worse. The long, slow, hypnotic drumbeat of but her emails, but her God-forsaken emails was implanted into America's collective subconscious over the course of the entire nomination race and her presidential campaign. Speaking of which, thirdly, James Comey, that Democratic operative who secretly plotted to destroy Trump, taking the inexplicable decision of publicly announcing that the FBI was reopening the investigation into Hillary's emails at the worst possible time for her campaign, only for the investigation to once again find absolutely nothing, but oops, it's too late, Trump has been elected. And finally, according to the Washington Post's exclusive on the report that's been prepared for the US Senate, Russia used every major social media platform to help get Trump elected. Now, bearing in mind the razor-thin margin of Trump's victory, in inverted commas, if 2 or even 3 of those things had happened, then he would still be grousing about how the election was rigged and using the resulting publicity to hook gullible saps into his next multi-million-dollar scam. But as it was, though, the unholy alignment of all 4 events is the reason why Hillary lost, And to be perfectly frank though, even if Hillary is the Democratic nominee once again in 2020, the chances of anything like that ever happening again are about the same as those of Trump actually reading his intelligence briefings. Meaning that next time Trump will actually need to beat his opponent instead of simply hoping that they lose. And ultimately, this is the reason why I'm making this video, the fact that the opening line of the final paragraph of the epitome of wishful thinking and denial links down to the underbar, which reads, "But if Trump can find a way to broaden his voter appeal," literally made me laugh out loud. Because after all, the fact that Trump couldn't broaden his voter appeal if it was his waistline is the very reason why I declare that in spite of 2 years of constant chaos, almost all of it being caused by the reality TV star-in-chief himself, electorally speaking, nothing has changed. Indeed, to quote the headline of the Vox article, also links down as the underbar, Trump doesn't want the wall, he wants a fight about the wall, because even before he rode down the escalator in 2015, back when he was leading the birther movement and condemning Obama on Twitter for everything that he himself would eventually do as president, the only thing that Trump has ever had to offer anyone who isn't a millionaire, billionaire, or running a corporation is rage and resentment against the other. Reassuring other insecure white boys along with their token supporters that the lefty, liberal, coastal Hollywood elite, Muslims, globalists, Mexicans, and on and on and on are the cause of all of their problems, therefore, by creating a boogeyman, creating a paradox which ultimately means that he has to keep the war raging, propping up straw enemies and fighting the same battles for all eternity, because as I explained in part 5 of my video series exploring what I describe as insecure white boy syndrome, links down to the underbar, winning would paradoxically mean accepting that the other isn't the cause of your problem after all, because, for example, congratulations, the wall is finally built, but even if illegal immigration, border crossings and refugees were a fraction of the problem that they're portrayed as being by Fox News and their ilk, the fact that there are these little things called planes and boats and tunnels and even ladders means that it was never anything but a multi-billion-dollar monument to racist stupidity and Trump's absurdly inflated ego. The opioid epidemic is still raging, manufacturing and mining jobs are still being increasingly performed by robots, and you're still the same angry, frightened and resentful loser that you were back in 2016, creating and attacking straw men in order to distract yourself from the fact that the world has changed, meaning that you are now completely irrelevant and utterly obsolete. Meaning that as a reality TV show host, and notice how I didn't use the past tense there because he remains one to this day, Trump's showdown with Schumer and Pelosi in the Oval Office was not held to negotiate anything, especially considering that, as the Vox article points out, the Democrats had previously offered to fund his wall in exchange for protecting dreamers, but instead merely to prove to his base, that shrinking minority of rabid Fox News addicts and Breitbart conspiracy swallowers, that he was still waging war against the socialist lefty pinko Democrats fighting to keep America great, which to the lizard brain to which reactionaries and propagandists have appealed for the last several decades means folding your arms, stamping your feet and refusing to ever compromise on anything, because as far as the lizard brain is concerned, whether you're trading with China, discussing immigration or funding NATO, everything is a zero-sum game, meaning that either you're the sad, pathetic and defeated loser, or they are. And this being the case, any thought of Trump somehow miraculously expanding his voter appeal when he spent the last 2 years doubling down on everything that causes people to turn away from him would be a joke if it wasn't so disturbing.